everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. For instance, this month's guest, Kat Giordano, was recommended to me by Dan Eastman. So if you like this conversation, you will like that conversation, and vice versa. Kat Giordano is a writer who lives in Pennsylvania. In 2018, she released her poetry debut, The Poet Confronts Bukowski's Ghost, under Philosophical Idiot. In 2022, her debut novel, The Fountain, was published by 30 West Publishing House. Kat works as a legal writer and, in her off time, can be found playing simulation games, working out, or popping off with bad takes on Twitter.com. She's an avid fan of psychedelia and teen dramas and will do anything for the bit. Kat is very cool. You like her. Before we get into the conversation, let me ask you for some money. If you would like to support the show on a monthly basis, you can do so at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. I've got 3 tiers. They all offer different things, and everything is worth it. You can also do a one-time donation to me at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe. That is also very appreciated. Or you can buy my book Tired on amazon.com. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Kat. I think that the place I want to start is with Bukowski, because I am bad at poetry, as I think I've established well over the course of the show, and so my relationship with Bukowski is that I saw a documentary about him one time, and I've probably read a poem or two here or there posted on Facebook back in high school or something like that.
Right.
So I am aware of Bukowski the man and his complicated public persona and some reaction to some of his works, but I'm not super familiar with his work. So The Poet Confronts Bukowski's Ghost is quite a title, and so I think that's probably a good place to start.
So what I wanted to do with the book was, I don't like a lot of the, I feel like Bukowski's such a polarizing subject among writers. There's this very, I don't want to call it performative because I don't know, what people are feeling when they say this, but there's a very instinctual seeming gut reaction of he's pretentious or something. But then there's also the people who they hear someone being derided for those specific reasons and are like, oh yeah, he's the best. And you have to, it's almost like everyone says he's complicated, but they refuse to actually approach him as if he's complicated. And they just, they say he's complicated, and that either means don't look over here at all these other things that he did, or he's the worst and nobody should like him or read him. And I wanted to, I don't know, kind of do something nuanced with that and bounce it off of some of my own experiences with other poets, because at the time, that was when I was first getting to know other writers, and the personalities are really out there, and realizing it's not really that teenage idealism of another writer, they must be like me, and we're all tortured souls and we all get each other, and realizing that your influences aren't necessarily the best people. And I don't know, a lot of complicated feelings about that. And I think in that sense it holds up, because I still see the same conversation happening all the time. And I still feel frustrated by the conversation every time it happens.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of where the whole idea came from. I don't know how much of it, comes through in the book, or what you felt about it as somebody who isn't really that familiar with his work, but maybe is familiar with the conversation around him, because you kind of have to be.
Right. I'm curious about that complicated thing. It reminds me of in my current obsession of esotericism studies, there's a lot of talk about Aleister Crowley, and one of the sort of internet personalities in the esotericism world talks about how Aleister Crowley is a really important figure, but it's so disappointing how he sees that the people who are obsessed with him are obsessed with trying to emulate his personality rather than engaging with his ideas. And so listening to you talk and then thinking about the poem Poet Man, it's like, okay, right. So like, do we not like Bukowski because maybe he was a jerk, or because maybe his poetry isn't the way that you think poetry should be, or whatever? Or is it because there's a bunch of dudes out there trying to act like Bukowski?
Right.
And that's just like not helping anybody.
Yeah, I feel like those guys are kind of missing the point. Like a lot of the people who idealize him in that way, like the point is, I think, like, at least to me, and especially when I was a teenager, like I don't sit around and read Bukowski, often now, but it was like he was, edgy, I guess, in the sense that it's not the kind of poetry you're typically reading as like a teenager in high school or whatever. But also there was like that sensitivity there, and I feel like a lot of people just kind of miss that part of it, or like they don't want to engage with that part, so they idealize him by just being like, yeah, I'm like a, I'm allowed to swear here, right?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm like a piece of shit, blah blah blah, and they don't engage with like their emotional self at all, so it just doesn't really come through as being genuine, and it doesn't actually like have the effect that they want it to have.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things I was thinking about with the Poet Man poem, is like, I wonder how many of these guys who do that, and I don't go outside, so I don't know how many of these guys are in my neighborhood. I don't know, I enough people have talked about this guy to make him a tangible image in my mind, even though hopefully I don't think I've ever met any of these guys. But like, I wonder how much of like the shittiness is genuine, right? Like, and how much is just like, I feel like I must chain smoke and drink whiskey to be a poet.
Right.
And I don't know. It's an interesting question, because obviously you can't look inside somebody's heart, right? Like,
right.
That's why with racism we've turned it into like you are a racist versus you are doing a racism, right? Because it's a lot easier to like point to a behavior and say, no, this behavior mirrors these things, rather than like, no, in your heart of hearts, you aren't actually depressed, and you just wear black and smoke cigarettes and go to open mic nights because you want people to think you are, or something like that, which is, I think kind of a horrible thing to tell somebody, or to think about somebody, because obviously you can't see into somebody's heart.
Right. Way. Like, yeah. I guess to your point, I mean, if they're doing it because they want to be seen a certain way, they're being seen in that way. So, they're accomplishing something. I don't know. I don't know what, but yeah. It's funny how much, like, I feel like when I wrote that poem, I didn't actually like really know that guy, like, myself. Like, I just knew the idea of that guy, and I could imagine that guy existed, but I actually feel like since writing that, I'm like, I feel like I could write a better one. Like, I could write a better Poet Man poem. But it might be a little too on the nose at that point. I don't want to go into like the passive aggressive territory, where you're like talking about some guy that like you actually know.
Subtweet as poem.
Yeah, I mean, I do have those, but I want to use them sparingly. Right.
The little bit of like Bukowski poem stuff that I do remember from the aforementioned like Facebook posts or whatever does seem like there is a style there that and I guess was he part of the Beats, or did he precede the Beats?
I think he was considered part of them. I feel like that's also something that's like hotly debated, but I don't remember like why. Right. If it was like a timing thing, or just people not wanting him to be one of them. I don't know.
Right. Because there is that element there of like some of the poetry that I've read that is more like, I don't know, sparse, or about like walking around in a city. Yeah. Like up through, like, I don't know. I guess it's not a new thing to note that like the Beats influenced alt-lit or whatever. Yeah. But I feel like enough people have a negative affiliation with alt-lit that anything that looks like it, or looks like it probably could have preceded it, probably also just gets gives people the sour taste in their mouth.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I think that's probably true.
Do you have really any sort of, because this book came out in 2018, so right? Am I correct on
Yeah.
that? I got real self-conscious there for a second. I said something
It's okay,
really.
I was like not sure either. So
I said it says copyright 2018, so I guess we're good. Said something real objective and got real scared real fast because I know what it's like to be on the internet. So you were writing probably in 2016, 2017, these poems,
yeah.
which would have been tail end of that. So I don't know, when did you start getting into writing? I know you did Philosophical Idiot for a while. Yeah, what's like the brief overview of the history of your
I mean, I've always
writing
like
self?
been into writing, but as far as like being a part of like the community or like a community, it was pretty much around the time I started editing Philosophical Idiot, because I got a BFA in poetry and fiction, but I wasn't really like engaging with anything like that wasn't old at that point. And it was like right around the time that I graduated, I realized I wasn't going to get an MFA because I didn't get in,
Mm.
didn't really I didn't get in, but I also like kind of realized by that time that it wasn't something that I would have wanted to do anyway. Wasn't sure what I was going to do, so I was like, well, let me just like go online, I guess, and like see what people are doing, and the rest is history. But as far as like the alt lit stuff that happened beforehand, I mean, I don't even like I was aware of it, I guess, but I didn't like have that much of like a personal experience. I didn't like read any like Talon when I was in high school. I would have been or like early college. I knew of all of those people and I knew of that scene, but I didn't really have any strong feelings about it.
Mm.
And I don't think I was even really like thinking about that when I was writing those poems, because a lot of them were part of my thesis for my BFA, and then I zhuzhed it up a little bit after that because 2017. But yeah, like I really didn't have any of that in mind at the time, but I do see how like now the parallels between that whole scene and like the polarization of that whole conversation, and also like the Bukowski conversation, it is pretty similar, and probably because people see those similarities, like you said.
Right. So, yeah, I feel like I'm developing a thesis about people who started writing around the beginning of the Trump era and their relationship to alt-lit. Like, there's something formulating in my brain there that eventually will be an essay. Like, you can tell, right? Like, there's going to be a criteria of, like, you can tell by X, Y, and Z that if this person's first book came out between 2015 and 2020, you can tell if they read Steve Rotenbach or not. Like, based on 1, 2, and 3 bullet points. I don't know what it is yet, but I feel like there's something there.
I'm very interested in this. I feel like sometimes I'm more interested in like I don't know, like the broader like landscape of writers than like anything that they actually write.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't really like the drama part of it because I don't like being burned by it, but like the general like just understanding it as like a scene is always interesting to me, as much as I also find it like emotionally exhausting.
Right.
So like that whole thesis, as you just put it, I'm really interested in where that ends up going.
Well, I'll have to stick to it for sure. I mean, a large portion of my YouTube watching is like, here's a 2-hour video about some nutty thing that happened over the course of 2 weeks on Tumblr in 2006. So like,
oh, I love that kind of stuff.
Alt-lit is very much that for me, like I engaged with it a little bit. I mean, engaged with it. I read some of it, but not any of the, I don't know. I've never read a Taolin book. And I know that there are other people whose names have sort of been scrubbed from history who I probably haven't read, but like I've read people who were, and had people on who have been like mentioned in the same breaths, your Pinks and Ciceros and whoever, and all of those people are like, I was just online and writing, and those people happen to be next to me, sort of thing. But wild things happening online is a fun fascination of mine. So it's fun to look at, you know, the ripple effects of that.
Yeah, fun in like a looking at a car crash sort of way.
Right.
At least in my opinion. But yeah.
You have a poem here that references The Reason by Hoobastank, and I just want to
Yeah.
congratulate you on totally understanding the intended purpose of that song. Like, that song is the abuser I'm sorry song. To the point where I'm not sure too many women in their mid to late 20s can hear that song and not think of a bad memory. And
It's like a great song too. Like
yeah.
I really do like that whole, I don't know, I feel like I mentioned it a few times in both of the books, but I really do like that whole what is it called? Like they call it like butt rock, that like early not really like the new metal stuff, but like that early 2000s like kind of just like not landfill indie, but like landfill like radio rock stuff. I love it because I was at a certain age, or that was like the last time I had like serotonin in my brain was like when that stuff was playing on the radio in my parents' car. So I was like, I still have that like weird nostalgic thing for it that like I feel like people just slightly older and slightly younger than me like don't understand.
Yeah. You know, my CD player in middle school had the it could pick up FM signals, and so when I was sick of listening to the one Linkin Park album that I had in my CD player constantly, I would turn on the alt rock station, and it would be Seether and Hoobastank and early Five Finger Death Punch and Avenged Sevenfold, and like this very weird genre of music. And that station too, it would kind of like with alt lit, like Primus would show up on there and System of a Down would show up on there, and like I don't know if you would catch, I don't know, I'm no longer confident, but I feel like you probably wouldn't catch System of a Down and Hoobastank like going on tour together or something, but they appeared on the same radio stations.
But I would go if they did.
Right. And there's a generation of men who listen to those radio stations and completely miss the point of every single System of a Down song. Completely miss the point.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is just wild to me. I remember getting into socialism and communism like early high school, and being like to my friends, like, guys, this is what they're singing about. And they're like, no, that's not it at all. I'm like, no, Prison Song. It's about prison abolitionism, guys. And they're like, no, it's not. It's about buying crack. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, whatever. So what was your experience running Philosophical Idiot?
I mean, it was awesome. I met my partner running Philosophical Idiot, and we now live together. So there's that. Yeah, so there's that aspect of it. But yeah, I think it was a really good way for me to like get familiar with a lot of people's writing really quickly, because again, I like sort of got online, and then like 2 months later I was editing Philosophical Idiot, and I was, you know, you can't possibly read everyone's book. Like I still can't do that. And so it was nice to be able to like get little bits and pieces from everyone, and it felt like I was like downloading so much stuff into my brain. Like that was a really formative time that I don't think like I would be the same if I didn't experience that. But it was also, I don't really think I'm cut out to be an editor for like a lot of like logistical reasons. Like I don't have the sustained kind of motivation that you need to like have a project like that. So I don't know. I don't think I'll probably ever be in that position again, but it was like the exact thing I needed at that point in time, was to get exposed to so much writing and like be part of so many people's, like, not to say, you know, I was like foundational to their career or something, but like to be the person who like publishes someone's like first couple, you know, short stories or something, like that's cool. And then to be at some point like foundational in that is like a cool experience.
Yeah, I agree. I don't, you know, send out a lot of short pieces anymore, but you know, around 2016 when I was getting online, it was nice to be like, you know, not rejected a million times before you get your first acceptance, because you can find a group of people who are kind of all starting out and all
Yeah.
figuring everything out. And then it's been cool to watch some of these people really blossom. And I mean, Philosophical Idiot put out a Noah Cicero book, so like
Yeah.
you're a heavy hitter
Yeah.
kind of in that way.
That was awesome too. That was like, he's like the nicest person to work with. He's like just like the most genuine nice guy. Like I feel like, back to the alt lit conversation, people think of like, the stereotypical alt lit guy, I guess. And like that guy does exist, I know he exists. But he's just so not that guy. Like he's just such like, he's such a person. Like, I don't know. It's just like so awesome working with him, and just like, seeing somebody who's not 27 and who's still like writing, and who's like isn't completely like jaded after having been in that in the throes of whatever that was, is like just really cool to me and kind of encouraging.
Yeah, I imagine. I've enjoyed the 2 times he's been on the show. I think he's a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot lately about the scope of the medium of books, fiction and poetry combined, like, because I keep wanting to say things online like, we as writers should do something, right? Like, we need to focus our energy on this, or like we need to get rid of that or something. But like, and then I remember that like some people are writing books to try to have money, and some people are writing books because they can't not write books, and some people fall in between. And like, even the intention of like what books do for the reader is different from book to book, right? Like I have so many books that are like just there for me to have fun to read, and some books that are like really trying to do something and kind of out there. And I feel like Noah Cicero is just like that guy who, if none of this existed, would still, somebody would find him dead at like 87 or something, and just find like manuscript on manuscript.
Yeah.
And then there'd be a 50-minute long YouTube video about the unsung Las Vegas based writer who has 27 unpublished novels that everybody needs to read.
Yeah. That really makes you wonder too, like how many people are, yet to be discovered who have like done insane shit.
Yeah. I think that's where the term outsider artist like should lie. It's like people who like don't even have a Twitter account, like people who just like who literally just couldn't care less about doing anything other than making the art. And some of those people like get into the mainstream. Like I feel Cormac McCarthy is kind of that, where I've talked about this story on the show before, I think, where like he was like living in a shack with his wife eating cans of beans, and like a college offered him X thousand amount of dollars to like speak about his book, and he's like, no, I wrote the book, I'm done with it. Like, why would I talk about it? And his wife is like, no, but we're living in a shack. And he's like, I don't care. Or like what's his name, Brian Lewis Saunders, the artist who does a self-portrait of himself every day, and every once in a while there'll be a viral post about the guy who drew self-portraits on drugs. Like he's got an Instagram account, and there has been a documentary made about him, so I don't think he's any longer like outside. Like he's definitely moved into a house from an apartment sort of thing.
Right.
And good for him. But like he's definitely is just like doing weird shit, and just the only difference is now that Instagram exists, you can see that like, oh, he's walking around with, cardboard tubes of different lengths attached to his eyes so that he can draw his self-portraits differently. And I think that's fantastic, but I also find it to be, kind of a bummer, because that's the type of art I'm most interested in, right?
Yeah.
Is the guy who has a storage unit with a throne made out of trash, right? Like, I need to know about that guy, but also,
if you know about that guy, he's not really that guy.
Yeah, the magic gets lost, right? It's like God.
Yeah.
Like once you figure out that God exists, like what's the point?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, sometimes and it's not really the same thing, but like I I'm not like other writers, but like
Mm-hmm.
I like to read things I wrote when I was younger. Like I have, insane levels of like backups of documents from, 2006 of like crap I was writing when I was, whatever age, like 10, 11. And like I don't think that writing was good, but I sometimes wish I could get back that like innocence where like you're not thinking about like what anybody else thinks about it, and no matter what you're writing you think it's the shit because it's like your idea and it's so precious to you. And now it's like I write something and then I'll like, I show it to one person, I'm like, yeah, that's all right. I didn't get the reaction I wanted, or like getting any reaction was good enough and I don't need to finish it. And it's like that level of being observed obviously changes, the art that comes out. And I wish I could have what I have now, but also never have anyone observe what I'm doing and like see what would come out, because
Yeah.
I feel like it could be interesting, or like anyone see what anyone could do if they weren't, worried about Twitter or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
easier said than done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think about my book, and like I wrote that all before I, when I was on Twitter at that point, I was doing something completely different with Twitter. I had a different name. I was trying to promote something else entirely, and that didn't work. So I shifted, but like there was an ease to it because I knew just enough to be able to put 80,000 words down in a Word document. Um, and there's something, it makes me think of like Zen Buddhism or something, right? Like these masters who like are also like forget everything you know.
Yeah.
And there's something there, there's maybe that's like the next level of writing, right? Like you've figured out the craft, you've learned all the rules, it works, you have an audience, and then somehow you figure out a way to like put that all aside for the hour
Yeah.
a day that you write or something. I feel like Kevin might have figured that out, right?
Oh, what?
Because he was
Yeah.
talking about like winning awards for writing and stuff in college, and now he's like has a poem that's just like, I'm a butt boy, fuck
Yeah.
you, cum socks, and like that's the whole poem.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think I actually like, I don't know. It's weird because when I think of people, he's not that much younger than me. I guess 2, 3 years younger than me maybe, but there's like a certain group of people that came around like right after me, I guess, who I'm like so jealous of them because they never seem to have that like weird like college brainworms thing of like, oh, I have to like go to a press and like query my book. Like I had to actually unlearn all that stuff. And he's one of those people that I'm like so jealous of because I just feel like he so easily, was like, oh, I'm just gonna start, you know, backpatting. I mean, he did Soft Cartel, I think, before that. He was
mm-hmm.
just like, oh, I'm gonna start my own thing and it's gonna be great. And I'm sure there's like self-doubt there, but I'm really jealous of people who didn't have to like unindoctrinate themselves from that like weird like MFA like pipeline thing that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and I think something too when the younger you get, right? That like you're born in the panopticon, and
Yeah,
you're just used to it. There is no like getting into fights with people on Twitter is just part of life. For me, I've like gotten into two
yeah,
fights on Twitter, and I've been on Twitter since like 2011, right? Like more than 10 years, and I've gotten into like two or three fights on Twitter, and like I I obsess over making sure I don't get into fights on Twitter. Like I so don't want to. I so desperately like do not want people to get upset with me on Twitter specifically. Like people can read my book and not like it and whatever.
right.
And people can listen to my podcast and not like it. And they can give me a 1-star review on Spotify because Spotify allows reviews now. Wink. But like for some reason, just somebody showing up in my DMs and being like, fuck you, asshole, you're a piece of shit, like
Yeah, that's like
really.
generous of them. Not just laying it all out in public.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. So
I wish
yeah.
somebody would fight with me in my DMs instead of just like I always like get like even when I'm not like popping off with some like insane take or something, and I just go away from my phone for a while, and I posted a picture of my dog or something and I forget, and I go and I look at Twitter and I have like 12 notifications and I'm like, what did I say?
Oh god.
What happened? And I'm always expecting someone to have like written an article in like tweet form about how I'm like the worst person who's ever lived. And I'm just like, oh, 10 people like my picture of my dog. Okay, that's a normal reaction for me to have to like seeing that.
Right. Well, Sherlock doesn't like it when people are mean on Twitter either. So let's shift into the fountain.
Sure.
You mentioned your degrees like specifically in poetry.
I did poetry and fiction. There was like
Okay.
poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, and I just didn't do the nonfiction concentration, did the other two.
I see. Okay. So it's not like a huge shifting from
No, although I guess for me, just logistically, writing a novel was hard because I had never done that before. But
right. I I was surprised by it because the premise is such that I would assume that the character of Jay, right? That's his name. Now,
yeah,
again, I'm saying things that are objective, and I'm getting scared.
yeah, you're right.
I I had a much different expectation about what the character of Jay would be. I just like completely assumed that this was going to be like, I don't know, much darker than the cover art would suggest, and it was, I mean, it wasn't a fairy tale or anything, but where does the story of the fountain come from?
Real life mostly, and also just like other people's experiences thrown into a blender. Like I really don't feel like I made anything up, but not all of it happened to me. And then the whole idea of the fountain, I mention it like in the acknowledgments of the book because I don't want to get sued. But there is this like astrology YouTuber that I used to watch religiously when I was going through like a really existential crisis point in my life, and she did come up with really briefly that concept of the fountain, which I like built upon and kind of reworked it to my own ends. But yeah, it's kind of just like a lot of things that I wanted to write about, but I didn't think I could write about if I like tried to make them too nonfiction-y. So I just kind of threw them all together. But a lot of it is personal experience. Take from that what you will. But yeah.
Okay. I also found, and I noticed this, I was recently reading a book. I can't remember who wrote it. It's called Wall Up, and it's on House of Lad Press, and it's very good, and I think people should read it. But I realized that since quitting drinking, I enjoy reading books about parties, especially people in their 20s and 30s partying, as like escapist fiction for me. And then like really, really kind of missing it while I'm reading it. And then they write about the hangovers. And I'm like, that's why I don't do it anymore. Among a whole bunch of other reasons. But like, oh yeah, that's right. That's why I don't go to parties. But like a lot of, the whole taco house section was difficult to read without like digressing into memories of like friendsgivings and, it's my 30th birthday, so we're going to wake up at 6 and take 30 shots before midnight somehow. And like, just like these weird, the idea of a taco house that eventually just kind of devolves into like a couple dudes in their 40s showing up to some girl's house.
Yeah.
Like feels so real to me. Like there is a socioeconomic, and it's very small, right? A very thin socioeconomic strata that is a universal concept that like everybody's got that one friend who like for some reason just like doesn't have parents but lives in a house, and just like everybody has that one friend who, if we were going to drink prematurely, it was going to be at that dude's house in that dude's basement, sort of thing.
Yeah, completely.
And
the I forget how old I made him, the drug dealer in the beginning.
Oh, he was like 16 or something. Yeah.
That's also a real guy.
Of course.
Yeah.
There was a nice touch in there that I made a point to remember, is that the character says, what are you playing, FIFA? And he's like, no, it's Madden. And then later outside the house, she's thinking about him, and she's like, he couldn't even step away from FIFA long enough to complete the drug deal. I'm like, oh my god. That's very much a I'm old for my age sort of idea that I enjoyed very much. I guess I'm really just kind of stuck on the fact that like Jay is not a complete asshole, and that like Tom didn't play a bigger part. But the book didn't like strike me as trying to like setting out to deconstruct the trope of that guy. Which I found interesting, especially because I read The Poet Confronts Bukowski's Ghost immediately before The Fountain. Like, I think there was a day break, maybe, between reading them. So, like, Poet Man is in my head, and then we meet Tom and Jay. So, I don't know, like, The Fountain sort of almost reminded me of Daryl in this way of, like... I haven't
read that. I really gotta read that.
Oh, it's good. Just the idea that the protagonist is getting like really good life experience, or really like ultimately beneficial life experience from places you wouldn't expect. And again, that feels like something that you would see better worded on the back of a book that you would find at like Barnes and Noble or something. But also like this is very much like a within the realm I am used to of indie writers sort of thing. So I appreciated it a lot for that whole thing. I guess maybe because it's, you know, autofic enough that maybe that's not something that you were like considering while writing it.
I don't know. I think I did set out when writing it to like to try and not in like a subtweety like this person sucked way, but like I understood the circumstances I was writing about very differently when I started writing it than I ended up feeling through the process of writing it. And so I feel like I ended up telling a much like truer, more nuanced story than I probably set out to tell, but not necessarily because I changed my mind, but just that like, I don't know. I mean, I matured a lot since the period of time I was writing about, and also like I think I started writing the book 2019, and then I finished it end of fall of 2020, and you know, mentally, emotionally went through a lot, got on meds for problems I'd had, you know, for my entire life. And I think like my whole mindset towards a lot of the things that had happened previous to that changed to the point where the book ended up being something completely different. And yeah, I love that book so much. Like I don't know, I love Bukowski's Ghost, but I feel like it just feels very like first book to me. But like when I think about The Fountain, probably because it's the most recent book I put out, but I don't know, I feel like it's like the most me thing I could possibly get away with. And so like I don't know, I feel really like emotional when I'm talking about it, which is so like, isn't this baby? Like, yeah.
I like that. I think that's a good relationship to have with the book. I tried a long time ago to write something with characters very much based on people I knew, and had I think a similar experience in that, like, if I'm going to write a believable book, I have to divorce some of my feelings about this person or these people and write it the way that it actually happened, and like actively try to understand why they made the choices that they made, sort of rather than just like write a book about someone who's sad and does shitty things to people. Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, I wouldn't recommend this, but you know, being mentally unstable enough to burn down your entire life to the point where you don't have to worry about what any of those people think anymore when you write about them is very freeing. Like, you know, not that I used anyone's real name, but just, you know, you're not still, you know, receiving content related to that person. So you're allowed to like,
play with the idea of them a little bit without feeling like they're gonna see themselves and not like how they were portrayed. And also, you're allowed to deviate in ways that are useful without feeling like you're somehow like betraying people that maybe you do still like and are friends with. Again, not that I would recommend destroying your entire life and starting over so you can write a good book, but it's
there's got to be a better way. There's got to be an easier way.
liberating. Yeah. Yeah. I would like to hope so, because I don't plan on doing that again. So
Yeah. So we're gonna have to, come up with a more effective way. I mean, some of like the autofic books I've read in the past 2 years, some of the ones I've enjoyed the most, are very much because there is that. I talk about it with my wife a lot, that I feel that I was like one or two incorrect decisions or more negative outcomes away from like becoming a crust punk or something, right? Like there is me in a house, in a 2-story house in a decent city, with not a ton of money, but I'm not like stressed or anything, and I got a dog and a pregnant wife, but like 2 nights going differently is like the difference between me doing this and me being in like, a band of like Leftover Crack or something, and just like, hopping trains across the country to get to the next gig. And the fragility of that is something that I acknowledge a lot, but also it makes it really easy to read this current environment of autofic, of like, I'm a dude in my house and there's no furniture, and like I'm making friends with the rats that are invading the apartment. Because I'm like so close to being that guy. And I guess I kind of touched on that a little bit with like the taco house bit, and like really, really feeling it. Like, yeah, let's like get drunk and go into the woods with, half of the group of people here are strangers to me. Like, that's a fantastic idea. Let's do that. That sounds like a fun Friday night. And, kind of going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, like, I worry that, there's that element of, well, that's how I wrote a good book, and so I can't, curtail my drinking or whatever. Like, I don't know. I couldn't, like, I don't really drink anymore. I don't do anything remotely that interesting anymore. But I couldn't have been in that space and I wrote a book about that, because I just wouldn't have sat down and written a book. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I couldn't have written that book then, doing all that, because it was like, it just wasn't important, Right. So and it's weird, because I felt kind of similarly. I was like, oh my God, like, nothing bad has happened to me in like years, like, what am I supposed to write about now? Of course, then the pandemic hits and you're like, yeah, all right. But, and then the weirdest thing, not my dog that we just got, but I lived with my partner's family for a couple years, and they got a dog, and the dog and I like bonded so much. And then I like started writing this thing about a dog, and I was like, oh, and it's like not, it's not one of those like Marley and Me sort of things. And I was like, oh, like, things can continue to happen in life when you're not like partying and stuff. But it definitely did take me time to like appreciate a somewhat slower life and like be able to see things in it that I don't think I would have been willing to see if I was, worrying about what I was going to do over the weekend constantly. So I don't know. I think there's a way to sort of like continuously farm a like, I don't want to say degenerate, that sounds like fucking Nazi shit, but like degenerate sort of like life experience into a book. But at the same time, there's no one else is writing about being obsessed with their dog, so I'll do that. Right. One of my like unpopular opinions is like, I think it's more important to focus on your mental health than on your art. Yeah. And like, there's more books that exist now than could ever be read. So like, I feel like, kind of aggressively being like, the world does not need your fucked up party book. Like, people have been writing fucked up party books since we've been able to drink alcohol. I mean,
Right.
read the Norse sagas. Like, that's all fucked up party books. And like, as much as I like them, it's one of my favorite like micro genres of indie lit right now is this sort of autofic. I destroyed my life in my 20s sort of books, but like, you know, method writing is, I think, not necessary. And you know, I'm glad that people can turn negative experiences into good books and hopefully in doing so heal a lot. But I'm always a little worried that someone is going to say, you know, I had success because I did this thing and then wrote a book about it. And so to continue to have success, I must also continue to do things like that or dumb things or whatever, you know, like,
Yeah.
I'm getting daddish in my old age, you know, just like I want everyone to be
Like,
safe.
this is making me,
Go ahead.
yeah. When I think it was right before the pandemic. It was like November 2019 was when I got on Zoloft, and like I was very worried, even though I knew that it was like a cliche worry to have, that like you're not going to be able to be creative anymore, or you're not going to have feelings anymore, and you're going to be, you know, some like dulled out version of yourself. And it's a very scary thing, but I also think that it benefited me in a way because I don't really worry about like so my main issue has just been like debilitating like anxiety. And for a while it does feel like, oh, nothing's happening and I just don't feel anything the way I used to, but it's because you're so used to like being in a constant fight or flight mode that you just can't appreciate those things. And I feel like that, you know, being able to adjust to that is like beneficial for, you know, me as a writer to notice. I think I already said this, but like notice like, you know, smaller, slower things and not always be in that like, you know, red alert state. But I understand people who are worried about losing that or like somehow not being able to get it back. But it's not everything, you know?
Right. Yeah. Do you remember? I can't remember. It must have been more than 10 years ago now. There were commercials on TV that were like adults just like not being able to like get in the car, you know, like this dude in a suit walks out to his driveway and he just like can't figure out how to open the car door, and so he like works his way in through like the back window and kind of slithers his way, and it ends up saying something like, you know, when you're quitting smoking and you're not used to doing something without a cigarette, you have to relearn how to do it.
Yeah.
And there is an element of that when you know, get the medication that works for you and stop doing the things that harm you. That it's like, wait a minute, what do I do? How do I how do I even sit down to write now? Like, I feel like going for a walk because the world's not terrifying. Like, how am I going to go sit down and write inside? Like, I can't do that. But I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it a million times until my lungs collapse that I wrote more since getting on medication, and better stuff than I ever did beforehand. And obviously as I get older and continue to get only healthier, that'll be a much easier thing to say. But like the 2-year period before starting medication and the 2-year period after that, my artistic output is night and day different, both in quantity and quality. And you know, your mileage may vary. I was never the type of person who could like smoke a joint and then sit down and write.
Oh God, no.
Or you know, like my alcohol consumption was very much a just like, as soon as it touches your lips, you're going until you can't walk anymore. Right. So like there was never going to be any writing happening while I was drinking, you know, and being drunk, especially on that amount of hard liquor, like that's all day. You're done, you know. And if you're doing that 4 times a week, like how much are you really writing, you know?
Yeah.
If you only have 3 days a week, you're lucid enough to sit down and write, you know. I mean, good for Stephen King, who could just black out on gallons of beer and then pump out novels. Like, that's got to be nice. But you know, if I could write in my sleep, I'm sure I would figure out a way to do it. because the output
Yeah.
would be there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think like I'm also just a little bit, I mean, again, like this is very like, you know, very formative years, so I probably would have matured as a writer anyways. But I do feel like I'm doing my best writing now, even though no one's reading it. But even like when I was writing The Fountain, I felt like, you know, when I started it around that time, I felt like that was like, you know, my best writing, and I was shocked that it was coming out of me. But also, you know, I actually had time to slow my thoughts down and have hindsight about things, and I wouldn't have had that. But yeah, it's not something I expected, but I think at the time I was also just okay with that. Like I was kind of like, well, I don't want to have no feelings and never be creative again, but I'd rather, you know, if not feeling like shit 24/7 means I'd never write again, I guess that's worth it.
Right.
But I feel like you're not supposed to say that because, like you said, that's a very hot take, you know, to put your mental health above, you know, your creative output. But that's definitely, you know, you get to a point where it's like, okay, do I want to like live or do I want to like be popular on Twitter? You know,
Right.
If I can't have both, if I can't have both, well, I hope I can have both, but
maybe I'll be so lucky as to have both.
yeah,
You know, yeah, it's very nice to be able to like enjoy a sandwich, you know, like
yeah,
I think, you know, I get euphoria from writing something really good, but it's also really nice to just like sit down and like have your dog next to you and be like, oh, this is good. This is objectively good. The couch is comfortable. The dog is fuzzy. YouTube is fine. Another AGDQ came out, so I'm gonna watch speed runs for 16 hours, and just like like it happens most weekends that at some point the three of us will be clustered together on the couch, and like I'll do a big sigh and just be like, oh wait, this is good. And that never happened when I was drinking. That never happened when I was depressed. And you know, as a guy who's had one book come out with 5 reviews on Goodreads, I would trade the book for that feeling any day. Especially since I can actually write more having that feeling.
yeah, you don't have to use, that's the good part. I got I don't know, I feel like everyone knows this now, but I wouldn't even worry about the 5 Goodreads reviews, considering I got
yeah,
I don't even know what happened. I still don't know what happened.
it was really weird. It felt like a strange target, you know.
And also, like, a lot of those like fake accounts ended up changing their reviews to like 4 and 5 stars like later.
Oh, did they really?
A couple, like the ones that it started with, ended up changing them, and that was also weird. I stopped looking after, like, I haven't looked at it in a long time, and God knows what it looks like now, because it's just it's so irrelevant and so like absurdly not reflective of reality that like I just don't even have to care about it anymore.
Right.
But that was just so insane. Like, for those of you listening at home, my my Goodreads account got mobbed by I think bots, real people, I don't know, and left anti-Semitic and racist shit all over my Goodreads reviews, and now my averages are really bad.
When I checked, they're getting better now. Now it's like 3.6 stars on each of the books, 3.6, 3.7, which is, I suppose, relatively low for like one of our books, because everybody either doesn't rate it or gives it 4 or 5 stars.
Yeah, they're like your friends. Yeah.
But yeah, it was weird. It was weird, and I don't know. I'm so part of my obsession with weird shit happening on the internet is that when weird shit is happening right now, I get like way too obsessed about it, which is part of the reason I took a break. I was like, I need to divorce myself from like looking at subtweets and then seeing who likes the subtweets to figure out like who we're talking about and who I'm not supposed to like. I feel like a lot of this conversation sort of mirrors the first one I had with Kevin, but I guess the more things change, the more things stay the same. So it was absolutely bizarre, and I guess you should feel proud that weird people on the internet decided to mob your page.
Yeah. I was chosen.
You were. There's a story of, there's a magician and podcaster named Brian Brushwood who also has a YouTube channel where he teaches people how to do magic tricks and stuff like that. And back before he was, I don't know, as popular as he is now, he was every once in a while he had like one viral video going around of him having a magic trick failing where there's like a roulette wheel with like styrofoam cups, and he's got a knife under one of them, and so does a magic trick. He's supposed to do the magic trick of missing the knife, but he, like immediately stabs his hand, and so it would go viral every once in a while. But for whatever reason, the famous 4chan board decided to pedo bomb his YouTube channel way back in the day, which is a thing that I don't think they do anymore, and I hope that they don't, because it's awful. But basically it was just like a bunch of people would go leave vague comments on his YouTube videos, like specifically like one YouTube video just to tank it, of like, I can't believe what you did to that 12-year-old girl, sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And his response was to make a YouTube video saying, oh, I won the B award, thank you. And they like made a fake little medal and he put it on, and he's like, thanks guys, I won the internet for today because 4chan noticed me. And then like all the comments stopped because it's like no longer fun, because the intended reaction is that you get upset and you deny it. And when a man denies that he did something on the internet, we all know what that means. Yeah. So he, you know, whenever people en masse are awful to you, that probably just means that you win the internet for the day. So you get to log off and make yourself a little medal.
Yeah, I actually forgot all about that until you mentioned you only had 5. I was like, how many Goodreads reviews do I have? Then I was like, oh,
I have a lot more than him.
Yeah. I was like, huh. I don't even remember how long ago that was. Like 3 years ago, and also like a month ago. I don't know.
It was yesterday, I think, actually. Yeah. One of the things that I guess I don't know, I was feeling this more during the middle of the book, and felt it less. Yeah, 66 ratings of The Fountain with an average score of 3.5 stars. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. But I was, and I'm not well read enough to have a like really good thesis about this. Something about this sort of autofic type stories written by women, or this like contemporary female-led indie lit thing. I can't remember exactly what I was like talking to my wife about, but it was something like I was thinking about like Juliet the Maniac and My Year of Rest and Relaxation and The Fountain, and a couple other books where it like it's the same sort of thing as like the Back Patio Press stuff or other post alt lit. I'm gonna make people mad and say post alt lit stuff, but there's like I don't know, there's like something different about it. And it's like, I don't know, like the attitudes of the characters, of like the female protagonists toward the men that they're interacting with is like very different from how I would expect. And it's hard for me to grasp. And I don't know if it makes any sense to you. Like, do you kind of like, I don't know, do you see what I see? Or do you see that there is something?
I'm interested in you trying to explain more. I think I do, but I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like, it's just how I think. So, but one thing that did strike me that I think about all the time is whenever I sent the book to Zach Smith and he read it, he said he felt like the book was about having like debilitating social anxiety. And I was like, really? I was like, that's just like, isn't like, it was just so like, I mean, I'm sure that comes through, but like, the fact that that's something he saw in the main character was so like, I just didn't expect that, because it's just the way that I see things. Like there's not like the self-awareness that like, oh, this is like how a person with like debilitating anxiety thinks during every interaction. I'm just like, oh, that's how people think when they're having a conversation. But
right.
I don't know. So it's hard for me to see that. From that distance, but
I guess I don't know. I'm thinking like particularly the sex scene.
Okay.
And like how she's thinking about blowjobs, like as she's giving a blowjob. And I guess as a person who's never given a blowjob, like there's just like this weird in that, you know, unusual to me sort of like, I couldn't even tell if she really wanted to. And I guess like the point is, spoilers, that like, I don't know, it seemed like even midway through the sexual encounter, she was like already kind of like getting over it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting. And I think, you know, something that more writers should play with is that like mid sex, you're like getting over the person.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess maybe it's just I don't read enough female writers who write about sex, so I don't have like a really good idea of like how the female mind considers, you know, giving blowjobs and stuff like that.
I think like, I don't know. Again, I don't know because I'm not a man, but like I think that part of it is you spend so much time when you're socialized growing up as a woman in our culture or whatever, to like be more concerned with what other people think of you, that you don't always even consider if you like the other person, or if you're just sort of like doing the compulsory, like, this person showed me attention, like I'm attracted to them, I guess. And so there's that layer where you're like, especially when you're younger and you're more insecure, where like it's not that like you pretend you want something that you don't, you just don't even really like think about the fact that you're allowed to like have opinions about other people, because you're so busy trying to, and I'm sure this isn't everyone's experience, but you're too busy trying to make sure that they like you and they're having a good time, and you're kind of just there, like kind of in third person almost. I don't know. Again, this is maybe just like my own personal neurosis, but yeah, I kind of get what you're saying.
Yeah. And the beauty of this show are all my like half-formed thoughts that I haven't figured out exactly what they even are yet. But I was did you read Marie Calloway's book?
No.
Okay, I didn't. I read some excerpts that had been posted around, and clearly she had, at the time of writing those things, at least wanted to project a fairly low opinion of men. And I'm thinking of like, again, Juliet the Maniac. There's a scene in the chapter Gay Sex that is like this very like lush scene about experimenting with girls, and then like I feel like all of the sexual scenes in that book with her boyfriend in the book are just kind of like bland and like almost like kind of annoyed, and I feel like there's stuff like that in My Year of Rest and Relaxation, whereas in Otessa Moshfegh's McGlue, which is a gay love story about two men, like it's so much more like lush and palpable and stuff. And maybe that just means straight people are boring. But I don't know. Again, there's like something there, and there's a seed.
Compulsory heterosexuality is a thing too. Like,
right.
I'm bi, so I guess like I'm sure like you still have a little bit of that where like you don't question, like, I don't know, like you have, I feel like in our societal situation, like you have to like go out of your way to not do like the straight person pipeline. And so there's all like that level of like passion and being present is more of a given. Again, I don't know, maybe this is just me talking out of my ass, but whereas I think like you're just sort of programmed to be like, oh, I want men to find me attractive, and like you can go along for the ride, and if you aren't present, it doesn't really like matter unless you say something. Like, that sounds really fucked up, but especially when you're younger, I feel like that is kind of how it goes for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I feel better now. Thank you for making this man feel better. I feel like I have a clearer picture, is what I mean. More seriously, where are you with like wanting to get stuff published right now and stuff? Like, are you just kind of writing to write, or are you like specifically like writing that with the end goal of like having it be a finished product?
I definitely want to finish it. I don't know what form it'll take. Like, I don't actually know if it's going to be like a long novel or like novella or just something that, you know, peters out but gets cannibalized into like a different thing. I want to eventually produce something. But I'm taking my time with it because I feel like I have to get into the space that I got into with the fountain where like I'm just so obsessed with my idea that it just doesn't matter. Like I'm not being precious about it. And I have another, I was just announced yesterday, another book of poetry coming out at the end of this year with Godpile Press. That doesn't have a title yet. It's put together, but I haven't titled it. So I'm going to be working on that. As for like publishing individual little things, I'm not super into that anymore because I just don't really feel like it's worth my while. Like I feel like it like massages like the bad part of my brain that's like way too concerned with like people and Twitter and, you know, getting noticed and stuff. So I'm trying to not worry about it so much. But I do have a couple things coming out. But definitely putting together like a larger finished product is something I care about a lot more. So this is a poem that isn't out anywhere yet, but you can probably find it on my social media if you would like to. It's called Creation Myth. When I was young, I swallowed a cone of light. My stomach hurt and everyone said I was lying. The rest is history. You know, like a dog who swallowed a small toy, got into the glitter. You have to bend to pick out the little bits glimmering in the shit. Every year feels like 7, and I only know a few words, and I only know them in certain tones. You don't know why I do many things. Why a noise can be enough to make me dart off to the edge of the yard and stand there all night looking. I'm afraid the light will run out and it will be like dying. I'm afraid of how small I want to be, of what passes now for control. Like a cartoon doing science, pulling a lever so hard it breaks off and the machine runs forever. I will now walk to the store in a tight little shirt. I will be a blurred cutout in the background of some man buying coffee, and if he talks to me, I will say what anyone else would say at a time like this. I will pretend to be a person who is not so great, and I will pretend to be pretending. And then I have one more for you, which is also not available anywhere yet, called It's All Right. And a funny story about this, I guess. When I sent this to my best friend, as I often do, like when I finish writing a poem for the first time, and I haven't gone over it yet, she was like, this is like a very sapphic poem from you. And then I had to tell her that this was like a poem I wrote as a love poem to myself. And I felt like the biggest egotistical piece of shit who ever existed. So this is called It's All Right. I crossed the desert just to tell you I crossed the desert. For years, lugging this stone on my back just to tell you its weight. I could have not. I could have called you. I could have found a hillside and skipped down and seen you there waving from across a big lake. I could have set the rock down, collapse, and let the sun cook me, and you'd be a jackal sniffing my body. I could have seen a white flower and eaten it, and the sky would fill with fractals of your face. I could have touched my hand and realized it was your hand too, and kissed it. We're alone, and the clothes I lay at your feet are bone stiff, salted with sweat. It doesn't make this more beautiful. They're just there, stinking, and my back is bruised. I know, but don't say it. I know, but I'm tired, and I need you, and my feet are cracked. Just let me lay here. Let me just lay. I'll tell you the story while you comb out my hair in the dark.